Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wa salatu wa salam ala Rasul al-Kareem. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Fiqh al-Muamalat online classes. And today's topics is basically a continuation of the expression of the contract, which is one of the important pillars in the contract. We have discussed in the previous session one of the conditions, which is using the past tense in the expressions of the offer and acceptance, and we had some discussion. And today we carry on the discussions for the remaining conditions of the sigha, which are as follows. We start with the following one that says confirmations of the offer and acceptance, meaning that the offer has to confirm the acceptance. It has to be a consistency between the offer and the acceptance, explicit or implicit. Explicit, like for example, the sellers will say, I hereby sold this car to you with 20,000, and the buyer will say, I hereby accept buying the car with the said amount of 20,000. So there is a very clear confirmations between the offer and acceptance. Explicit, sometimes the example given is that the seller will say, I hereby sold you this car with the 20,000. And basically the buyer will say, I hereby bought or purchased this car with 21,000. So this is a kind of implicit confirmations, and there is no contradictions actually between the offer and acceptance, on the ground that the one who's willing to buy a car with the 20,000, obviously he's accepting to buy the car with 20,000. So this is a form of implicit what's so-called a statement, an acceptance that has been issued by the buyer. So either explicit or implicit, but the bottom line, there is a consistency between the offer and acceptance on the subject matter. The one that could be questions and not accepted in the scenario whereby the seller will say, I hereby sold this car to you the 20,000, and the buyer will say, I hereby accept buying the car with 19,000. So here there is no confirmations between the offer and acceptance, and here the scholars look at this kind of acceptance as basically a kind of a counter offer. It is a kind of bargaining. It's kind of pulling the seller for further negotiations because he didn't confirm the price. Or sometimes in the scenario of banking, business and banking, and in the case of the products and services offered by the Islamic financial institutions, normally it is in a form of signing. So the offer and acceptance normally will be reflected in a form of signing the document. So you see the price, you see the profit rate, you see the installment, you see the tenure, you see all this kind of specification that has been highlighted in the offer letter, and of course respectively later on in the legal documentation. Then signing on that is again a confirmations of the offer and acceptance, meaning that you are confirming all the informations of selling price that has been offered by the financial institution along with the profit rate as an agreement, or in case of lease and so on and so forth. So bottom line, you don't counter offer, but you accept and you produce your acceptance in a form that confirm the offer either directly or indirectly, or implicit or explicit. The second requirements of the sigha or the offer and acceptance is basically clarity of the offer and acceptance, meaning that you have the two. This one, of course, these descriptions are based that the offer and acceptance are issued in a traditional way through offer and acceptance, through a verbal expressions, meaning one will speak, the other one here, and the other one reply. But of course, when we go along with other sessions, we will see that the communications and the offer and acceptance has been evolved in the market, and it is expressed in a different modes and way. We'll discuss that one later on. But at least the Sharia requirements have been built upon the traditional practice of the market, which is basically the ground, and after that market can evolve and Sharia could accommodate the evolution of the market based on the urf. So here, the clarity of the offer and acceptance, meaning that you have to hear, you have to understand, and the pronunciations and the amount should be clear. You cannot say, I hereby sold to you this with 20. 20 what? Is it US dollars or ringgit Malaysia or a different currency? So what do you mean by that exactly? So you have to make it clear. Is it also a spot? Is it deferred? It is through installments. So it has to be also communicated clearly to the buyer. So he will hear, he will understand, he will digest, and based on that, he will express his acceptance based on the information that he has heard. So that's one, it has to be clear. All the information that he's reading, either you read, either you understand, but the bottom line is that information should be clear to remove any kind of potential of jahala, lack of informations, or potential ambiguity or a degree of gharar in order to avoid any potential dispute between the two contracting parties. And the third, of course, the third requirements in this session, but in overall the fourth one, because we have discussed previously one of the conditions. If I may just recap, the first one is, of course, using the past tense. The second one is the confirmations of the offer and acceptance. And the number three is basically clarity of the offer and acceptance to every one of the two contracting parties in order to ensure a proper understanding. And the fourth one and the last one, the connections between the offer and acceptance, meaning that the offer and acceptance should be connected in one session of the contract. And maybe you heard about it. This is called Majlisul Aqd, or it's called the session of the contract, which is traditionally a physical meeting, meaning that the buyer and the seller will meet physically somewhere, let's say in the market, in the showroom, to buy a car, for example. They will discuss, they will negotiate, they will agree that the offer and acceptance will take place in that kind of majlis. Of course, again, this is a traditional and the physical majlis, but as the market evolved, the majlis has been evolved into a virtual majlis, whereby the offer and acceptance could be done through different modes of communication, such as WhatsApp, Facebook, Skype, Zoom, all these modes of communications of platform and social media and so on and so forth, as long there is a very clear communications and there is a what's so-called a clear flow of informations between the buyer and the seller through that mode of communication. We'll talk about it later on when we comment on the IOF standards on the financial dealing on the online transactions. So going back here, so the connections will be between the offer and acceptance, meaning that number one, the conversation will be between the two, whereby he will issue the offer, and of course he has the right to think about it, whether he wants to buy or not. And sometimes the person will think about it, will negotiate, will discuss with his wife, with his kids. He will just recalculate, calibrate things. Then after that, he make decision. So he has that kind of time to think about, but within the same session, within the same majlis. And sometimes scholars give example in case, let's say, you issue the offer, I hereby, after we, let's say, settle everything, then we say, I hereby sold you this car with 20,000, and the buyer, instead of saying yes, I hereby accept or hereby purchase the car with the same amount of 20,000, for example, he will engage into a different communication and conversation. Let's say, tell him, well, do you know when is the next holiday? Do you know when the school will open? Then he tried to engage the seller into a different conversation. Sometimes scholars look at that as a form of decline of the offer, because he didn't issue the acceptance, but engage and pull the seller into a different conversation. That one is basically an indication of declining the offer. The second point I would like to highlight here is that whether if we assume that the buyer confirm, let's say the seller say, I hereby sold this car to you with 20,000, and the buyer said, I hereby accept buying the same car or this car with the same amount of 20,000, let's say dollars or ringgit or any currency. Meaning that offer has been issued, acceptance has been issued. What status of the contract from Sharia standpoint? Is the contract concluded? No doubt about it, but is it binding or not? So contract has been concluded, no doubt about that, because there is a connection between offer and acceptance between the buyer and the seller on the subject matter where price has been mentioned, subject matter has been mentioned and highlighted through the descriptions and so on and so forth. The two contracting parties are competent, so basically contract is concluded. But the question is it binding on both parties, or it is a non-binding contract? Here there are two views among the Sharia scholars. Majority of the scholars look, this contract is concluded but not binding, meaning that each one of the two contracting parties, they have the option to revoke back the contract based on the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Sellers and buyers both, they have the right to revoke back the contract unless they have been separated from each other, meaning as long they are in the same session of the contract, as long they are in the same majlis together, and the contract has been concluded, the contract is not binding, meaning any time one of them hold the right to revoke back and terminate the contract as long they are together. If they separate each other for whatever reason and someone leaves, for example, the session of contract, so basically the session of contract is terminated, and as a result of that, the contract will become binding. But the view of other school of law, like for example, the Maliki school of law, a view that if the offer is issued and the acceptance is issued, so the contract is concluded and binding on the spot immediately, regardless whether the two contracting parties are sealed together or they have been separated from each other. This is one of the debated matters basically when it comes to the concluding of the contract. This is basically the overall, I may say, the overall conditions pertaining to the expressions of the contract or pertaining to the sigha, which if I recap using the past tense, which is recommended, I hereby sold, then the confirmations of the offer and acceptance explicitly or implicitly, and to avoid the counter offer. And of course, the clarity of the offer and acceptance should be clear, understood, in order to basically express consent and fully engage with the transaction. And of course, the connectivity of the offer and acceptance, they should be connected, not necessarily immediately on the spot on the second, because he has the right to take pause and think about it, but we are talking about the same session of the contract. And in case it is concluded, so it is concluded but binding based on the view of the Maliki and non-binding based on the majority of the scholars. But in case the two contracting parties separated from each other after concluding the contract, it is concluded and binding by consensus. With that, thank you very much, and see you inshallah soon in the coming session. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.